Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. So we're going to head into some more urban legends. These come under scare stories, but of course it does depend what kind of things scare you. I wouldn't say all urban legends are scary as such. Maybe a little creepy sometimes, but they come under that section, scare stories, just so we're clear. Back seat driver. One summer night, a British driver was forced to pull into a deserted petrol station, the only one around. She was in a hurry and didn't want to hang around any longer than was necessary. So she proceeded to pay the pump and started to fill up her car. Suddenly, a man's voice came over the loudspeaker, telling her to come into the garage to pay. She pretended she hadn't heard him and continued to fill the tank. He spoke again and told her there was a problem with her credit card, so she would have to pay in the kiosk. Then the pump stopped. Now she was annoyed. She was sure that there was nothing wrong with her card, but she didn't want to drive off without paying, so she walked over to the garage, where the man beckoned her inside. She angrily protested that her card worked perfectly well, and that she had plans to be and places to go. But he interrupted her and locked the door. He quietly told her that he had watched a man sneak into her car when she was distracted at the pump, and he had already called the police. The woman looked out of the window. She saw the back door of her car wide open and a hooded figure walking quickly away from the station. And that's the old classic back seat. Of course, there's other ones where it goes into full details that she didn't listen to the gas attendant, and you know what happens. Maybe that'll be in there later. Anyway, next one is date night. One summer evening, a teenage girl who lived in a remote English village was picked up by a boy for their second date. They were driving through the countryside when he mentioned that they were running out of petrol and therefore might not make it home. She thought he was joking, but she didn't find it particularly funny, especially when the car spluttered to an halt under an old oak tree. They really had run out of fuel. They both glanced at their mobile phones, but neither could get a signal in such an isolated spot. Maybe we'll just stay here till morning, he suggested. This didn't go down well with his date, so he told her to stay in the car, lock the doors, while he went looking for help. The village was only a few miles back, the other way, and there was an old-fashioned phone box there if his phone still didn't work. The girl was understandably angry at her useless date for managing to run out of fuel and leaving her stranded in the middle of nowhere, but she settled down to wait for his return. It was too quiet for her liking, with the only sound being the wind, so she turned on the radio to keep her company. A news bulletin was read out, but the reception was terrible, so she put on a CD instead. An hour passed, then two. She started to get worried, wondering if he had abandoned her. Maybe he had been hit by a car on the dark country roads. She had heard of such accidents happening before. Then the car battery died, and the music stopped. She cursed and slammed the dashboard. Suddenly she heard a thump, followed by a scratch or tapping sound on the roof of the car. She told herself it was probably a tree branch. It was a windy night. But it was a loud noise, so she kept still and didn't make a sound. The noises continued and made her imagination begin to play tricks on her. Was someone out there? Her fear continued to grow, but she didn't dare open the door to escape. Just when she couldn't bear it any longer, flashing blue lights lit up the car and she breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that her date must have come back with some help. The car stopped and a policeman walked slowly towards her, but there was no sign of the boy. The officer shined his torch through the window and beckoned her out of the car. "You're safe. Just keep your eyes down. Don't look back at the car," he instructed. Confused, the girl asked if the policeman had seen her date. "There's time for that later," came the reply. She opened the police car door, but could not resist a quick look back. What she saw made her freeze in terror. The boy was hanging upside down from the oak tree, lit by the flashing lights and swaying in the wind. His bloodied head was knocking on the car, and his fingernails were scraping on the roof. "Didn't you listen to the radio?" asked the policeman. "A murderer just escaped from the mental hospital in town." I'm sure you're all aware of that urban legend. And here we have another one which is very, very common, might I add. You probably know it. Don't turn on the light. Student halls of residence are strange places. You never know who or what you might find in your room. You don't really know the people you're suddenly living with, but everybody wants to make friends. They're always inviting themselves around, and there's no real privacy. One Friday night at university in England, first-year student Jenny was getting excited about a freshers' event that was taking place that evening. She was trying to persuade Emily, her new roommate, to come along. But the latter didn't feel like partying, so eventually Jenny left her there and went to the party alone. Later that evening, she came back to the room to get something, leaving the light off so as not to wake Emily. Before returning to the event, when Jenny woke late the next morning, she didn't remember much about getting home. As she rolled out of bed, she saw that Emily also appeared to be still asleep, which wasn't like her at all. Then she saw the blood on the sheets. Emily was dead, her throat cut. Above her on the wall, and scrawled in blood, were the words, "Aren't you glad you didn't turn on the light?" And there's a few variations of that urban legend around. The next story is the Red Room. You're browsing on your computer one evening. You're supposed to be working on a project, but instead are trawling through social media posts. Suddenly, a pop-up window appears with a cryptic question. "Do you like?" You assume it's an advert and close the window. You try to get back to what you are doing, but the same question keeps popping up. Then you hear a child's voice saying, "Do you like?" Thinking it must be some kind of computer virus. And as the voice becomes more and more insistent and aggressive, you try to ignore it. Then the screen turns red, and the same window pops up again. But this time it asks, "Do you like the Red Room?" Then you remember that you've heard of this happening to other people, and the memory makes your blood run cold. A list of names appear on the screen, a list of victims, all of whom were found in a room painted red with their own blood. You're scared, but you can't help clicking through it. The last name is yours, and you hear a noise behind you. The next story is Fear of Needles. A series of mysterious and frightening events were reported to police forces in cities across the United States in the early 1990s. In one such incident, a man in Seattle reported to a local hospital in a panic, complaining of a small puncture wound to his right arm. He explained that he had been outside a bar in the city when he felt a sharp pain in his shoulder. As a young woman in noticeably poor health brushed past him, she was carrying a sharp implement, possibly a surgical needle, and she hissed, "Welcome to the HIV club," while looking him directly in the eye. He frantically removed his shirt and saw the puncture wound. When he recovered from the shock to look for the perpetrator, she was nowhere to be found. He went to the police a few days later, but despite trawling through surveillance camera footage of the busy street, they could not track down the woman. The next story is Hooked. Young people in Colorado know the story of the hardened hitman who lost his mind after he was hired to kill an entire family. The job went wrong, and the contract killer lost both his hands in a gangland punishment. He was subsequently incarcerated at a secure mental hospital out of town and told that he would never be released. In place of his hands, the prison authorities attached two large hooks. Several years went by and people had forgotten about him, until one night he escaped after murdering a guard who had taken pity on him. Bulletins went out on the local radio all night. He was highly dangerous and should not be approached. A young couple who had driven into the country for some privacy heard the reports while they were parked in a popular location overlooking the town. They realised that they had driven past the psychiatric facility only a few minutes earlier. The girl didn't want to be out at night when the killer was on the loose, but the boy told her it would be fine and that they had probably caught him by then anyway. However, his date was having none of it, so the boy reluctantly fired up the car and drove back into town. Listening to the radio for updates, all the way home they heard a knocking noise coming from somewhere on the car, which he explained away as a regular problem. When they reached their house and got out of the vehicle, they saw what had been causing the noise. A large hook was hanging on the passenger door handle, covered in blood. The next story is Behind the Mask. A child in Japan was walking home from school one evening. The friends who usually walked with her had already gone home, but she was only one street away from her house. She saw a young woman walking towards her, wearing a surgical mask, like those that many Japanese people use to protect themselves from smog and diseases. She stopped in front of the child and leaned down towards her. The child was not worried, and she seemed friendly enough. "Where are you going?" the woman asked. "I'm going home from school. My house is just down the road there." "Do you think I'm beautiful?" came the unexpected question. The girl politely, if a little concerned, said yes. The woman then asked, as she removed her mask, "How about now?" and revealed her horrific wound that slashed her mouth from ear to ear. She bent down to the frightened girl and asked again through her mutilated lips, "How about now?" The girl was horrified by her appearance, but she had been brought up to be always polite, so she told her that she still looked beautiful. Then the terrifying figure disappeared. The next day at school, the girl told her friends what she had seen, and they immediately recognized the story. They told her that the woman had appeared to many girls over the years, but not all of them had been so lucky. If she hadn't said the right thing, the woman would have cut the same terrible smile into the girl's own face with a pair of scissors and condemned her to roam the streets in a mask. The shocked girl did not walk home alone again for a very long time. The next story is The Green Man. In Pittsburgh, children are told the tale of the Green Man, a terrifying figure who lives alone in an abandoned house and wanders the country lanes at night, looking for kids to chase. He was also known as Charlie No Face because he had a terrible disfigurement. Some said that he was born that way, whereas others believed he was struck by lightning. Other possible explanations included an accident involving power lines or an horrendous crime that drove him insane. Whatever this cause, it had made his skin glow green in the dark, and just viewing his face was enough to induce terror. However, you always had plenty of warning before you came across him, as he was blind, so you could hear him tapping his way along the road with his stick. Kids who played in the country at night would scare each other with stories about him, and young couples who drove out to Green Man Tunnel under the railroad would keep an eye out for him. as everybody knew that Charlie No Face liked to wait under the bridge and tap on the steamy windows of cars with his stick. If you were brave, you would drive around the roads where he had been seen before, trying to catch sight of his face. Cars would drive him from miles around. Tragically, there was a real person behind this myth, but he wasn't called Charlie. It was a local boy who had suffered a near-fatal electric shock aged 8 after daring to climb up a railway bridge. In doing so, he accidentally touched a live electrical wire and was blasted with 20,000 volts. He lost his left arm below the elbow, as well as his eyes and nose, and his face was severely burned. Somehow, he survived and eventually returned home to his family. He lived into old age, mostly spending his days inside, as his appearance in the bright light of the day would scare people. But he wandered the country lanes at night, just looking for someone to talk to. Once people got over his shocking appearance and got to know him, they said that he was actually a nice guy. Proof of the saying that you shouldn't judge a book by its cover. And those are our first lot of urban legends that come under scare stories. Thank you for listening, and many blessings.